After the collapse of Nazi Germany, the SS ceased to exist. Numerous SS members, many of them still committed Nazis, remained free in Germany and across Europe. On May 21, 1945, the British captured Himmler, who was in disguise and carrying a forged passport. In an internment camp near Nuremberg, he committed suicide by biting into a cyanide capsule. Several other key SS members fled, but some were quickly captured. Kaltenbrunner, head of the Reich Main Security Office and the highest-ranking surviving main department chief of the SS after Himmler's suicide, was captured and imprisoned in the Bavarian Alps. He was one of the 22 defendants tried at the International Military Tribunal in 1945–46. Some SS members were subjected to summary execution, torture, and beatings at the hands of liberated prisoners, displaced persons, or Allied soldiers. American soldiers from the 157th Regiment, who entered the Dachau concentration camp in April 1945 and witnessed the acts committed by the SS, shot some of the remaining SS guards in the camp. On April 15, 1945, British troops entered Bergen-Belsen. They put the SS guards on starvation rations, made them work without breaks, forced them to deal with the remaining corpses, and stabbed them with bayonets or beat them with rifle butts if they slowed down. Some members of the United States Army Counterintelligence Corps handed over captured SS concentration camp guards to displaced persons camps, where they knew they would be subjected to summary execution. Today we're going to see what happened to the men of the SS after the end of the war. Today we will see what happened to the SS men after the end of the war. For many, even today, this is something of complete revolt. Get ready. After the well-known Nuremberg Trials, other SS prosecutions and convictions followed. Many defendants tried to excuse themselves, using the claim that they were only following superior orders, which they had to obey unconditionally as part of their oath and duty. The courts did not consider this a legitimate defense. A trial of 40 SS officers and guards from Auschwitz took place in Krakow in November 1947. Most were found guilty, and 23 received the death penalty. In addition to those tried by the Western Allies, it is estimated that around 37,000 SS members were tried and convicted in Soviet courts. Sentences included hangings and long periods of forced labor. Piotr Chivinsky, director of the Auschwitz-Birkenau Museum, estimates that of the 70,000 SS members involved in crimes in concentration camps, only about 1,650 to 1,700 were tried after the war. After the war, many ex-Nazis fled to South America, especially to Argentina, where they were welcomed by the regime of Juan Perón. In the 1950s, former Dachau prisoner Lothar Hermann discovered that the Buenos Aires resident Ricardo Clement was actually Adolf Eichmann, who in 1948 had obtained a false ID and a landing visa for Argentina through an organization run by Bishop Alois Hudal, an Austrian cleric sympathetic to the Nazis, then residing in Italy. Eichmann was captured in Buenos Aires on May 11, 1960, by Mossad, the Israeli intelligence agency. At his trial in Jerusalem in 1961, he was found guilty and sentenced to death by hanging. Eichmann was quoted as having said, "I will leap into my grave laughing because the fact that I have the death of 5 million Jews, or enemies of the Reich, as he later claimed to have said, on my conscience, gives me extraordinary satisfaction." Franz Stangl, the commander of Treblinka, also escaped to South America with the help of Hudal's network. He was deported to Germany in 1967 and sentenced to life in prison in 1970. He died in 1971. Mengele, concerned that his capture would mean a death sentence, fled Germany on April 17, 1949. Aided by a network of former SS members, he traveled to Genoa, where he obtained a passport under the false name Helmut Gregor from the International Committee of the Red Cross. He sailed to Argentina in July. Aware he was still being hunted, He moved to Paraguay in 1958 and to Brazil in 1960. In both cases, he was helped by former Luftwaffe pilot Hans-Ulrich Rudel. Mengele suffered a stroke while swimming and drowned in 1979. Thousands of Nazis, including former SS members such as Traniki guard Jakob Reimer and Circassian collaborator Cherim Subzukov, fled to the United States under the guise of refugees, sometimes using forged documents. Other SS men, such as Subzukov, SD officer Wilhelm Höttl, Eichmann's aide Otto von Bolschwing, and accused war criminal Theodor Sevecka, were employed by American intelligence agencies against the Soviets. As CIA officer Harry Rositsky noted, it was a visceral business of using any bastard as long as he was anti-communist. The willingness or desire to recruit collaborators means, of course, you didn't look too closely at their credentials. Similarly, the Soviets used SS personnel after the war. Operation Theo, for example, spread subversive rumors in Allied-occupied Germany. Simon Wiesenthal and others speculated about the existence of a Nazi escape network called Odessa, acronym for Organization of Former SS Members, which supposedly helped war criminals find refuge in Latin America. British writer Gitta Sereny, who conducted interviews with SS men, considers the story false and attributes the escapes to post-war chaos and Hudal's Vatican network. Although the existence of Odessa remains unproven, Sereny notes that there certainly were various kinds of Nazi aid organizations after the war. It would be surprising if there weren't. If we go back a few years before the final surrender, we see something quite interesting. Even at the height of its power and influence in 1942 to 1944, the SS was not omnipotent within Nazi Germany. In the occupied territories, the SS encroached on the jurisdiction of civil authorities and even the Wehrmacht. However, as the invading Allied armies and aerial bombings brought the war into Germany in 1943 to 1944, the SS was challenged by two powerful rivals. The Nazi Party apparatus under the chief of the party chancellery, Martin Bormann, was one of those rivals. The power of the party bureaucracy was anchored in the district leaders of the party, who also had state authority in their positions as Reich Defense Commissioners and could mobilize the German population for the final struggle. Therefore, the party could control the increasingly limited flow of men and women into military, police, and auxiliary functions in the last year of the war. Furthermore, in his second role as the Führer's secretary, Bormann controlled access to Hitler, whose health and connection to real events declined rapidly after the July 20, 1944 assassination attempt, and played an increasingly large role in translating the Führer's statements into orders for implementation. The SS began to disintegrate in 1945. Individual SS officers hoped to exploit tensions between the Western Allies and the Soviet Union to initiate negotiations for a separate peace with the Western Allies that would allow the Nazi state to survive and continue fighting against the USSR. Facing unwavering demands for unconditional surrender, the SS men who sent out probes lacked the authority to offer unconditional surrender even to the Western Allies. Despite these considerations for a separate peace at the highest levels, the SS continued to eliminate enemies of the regime, even as the Nazi German state staggered toward collapse in the winter of 1944 to 1945. Of the 1.2 million prisoners who died in concentration camps, approximately 350,000 supposedly died in the last 5 months of the war, nearly 30%. Most succumbed to the consequences of the SS's criminal negligence, starvation, exposure, and disease. In addition, SS camp personnel and guards shot, hanged, or otherwise killed thousands of prisoners in the final months of the war. By Himmler's orders not to allow concentration camp prisoners to fall alive into enemy hands, SS guards forced tens of thousands of prisoners to march, often in bitter winter conditions, as Allied and Soviet advances forced the evacuation of concentration camps. German authorities transported prisoners by truck, in open rail cars, and on foot to camps located deeper within the Reich. Remembered by survivors as death marches due to high mortality rates and the brutality of SS guards shooting prisoners along the way, these evacuations continued until the war's end. Not even detainees from Gestapo and Kripo prisons were spared. As Soviet troops advanced on German positions in the Soviet Union, Poland, and the Reich itself, security police officers often massacred the remaining prisoners, Jews and non-Jews, before fleeing westward. Frequently, even in the final days of the war, massacres motivated by racial hatred, revenge, or fear occurred as the result of local initiatives. There are no adequate records to fully document these murders, or even to estimate the total number of victims. More members of the Auschwitz SS garrison were tried in Poland than anywhere else. From 1946 to 1949, around 1,000 people suspected of committing war crimes at Auschwitz were extradited to Poland, primarily from the American occupation zone in Germany. Charges were brought against 673 people, including 21 women. The most well-known trial was that of the first commandant, Rudolf Höss, before the Supreme National Tribunal in Warsaw. On April 2, 1947, the court sentenced Höss to death. The Krakow trial of the Auschwitz SS garrison. The Supreme National Tribunal convened in Krakow for a second major trial, known as the Auschwitz Garrison Trial. Of the 40 defendants, 23 were sentenced to death and 6 to life imprisonment. Other trials were held between 1946 and 1953 before regional. The most common sentences for lower-ranking Auschwitz garrison members were 3 years in prison, 203 times, or 31.9% of all sentences, and 4 years, 111 times, or 17.5%. Death and life imprisonment sentences were relatively rare, 41 times, or 6.1%. Trials of SS Auschwitz garrison members outside Poland, Federal Republic of Germany. Aside from Poland, the Federal Republic of Germany conducted the majority of trials of members of the Auschwitz concentration camp garrison. However, the turning point in the prosecution of Nazi war criminals there did not occur until the 1960s. Many former Auschwitz SS members were examined as witnesses in this trial, but never faced charges, either before or after. Despite significant efforts by prosecutors in some German states, especially the prosecutor's office in Ludwigsburg, the results of the investigation and punishment of Auschwitz SS men by West German justice were extremely modest. In 1972, charges were brought in Austria against 4 former SS members of the Auschwitz garrison, including 2 officers from the SS Construction Council. All the defendants were acquitted. German Democratic Republic. The most famous and only trial in East Germany was that of SS Dr. Horst Fischer in 1966. The court sentenced Fischer to death. In Czechoslovakia, 1 SS auxiliary and 1 female SS overseer were sentenced to death. American, British, and French military tribunals, members of the Auschwitz SS garrison, were tried before American, British, and French military tribunals in the late 1940s as part of the trials of garrisons from other concentration camps. The commander of Auschwitz II, Josef Kramer, the women's camp director of Auschwitz I and Birkenau, Franz Hössler, and the SS female overseers Irma Grese and Elisabeth Volkenrath were sentenced to death in the Bergen-Belsen garrison trial in 1945. The British also sentenced 2 Auschwitz doctors to death in 1946 during the trial of the Neuengamme concentration camp garrison. Help us keep this project alive here on YouTube by subscribing to the channel. Thanks for watching, God bless you all, and see you soon.